May 2004. A small windowless room in Iraq. The air is heavy with the smell of dust and stale sweat. A portable camera sits on a tripod. The red recording light flickers to life with a faint mechanical click. How to turn a local murder into a global tool of control? The answer lay in the camera lens. Nick Berg, an American civilian contractor, sits on the floor. He wears a bright orange jumpsuit. This specific color, a loud synthetic contrast to the drab walls, would soon become the visual brand of the movement. Behind him stand 5 men. Their faces are hidden by black masks. They are motionless. Berg is forced to speak. He states his name clearly into the microphone. The resolution is low, grainy, and jittery. In 2004, this technical flaw is a tactical advantage. The small file size allows the footage to bypass weak internet infrastructure and flood global forums in minutes. The architect of the scene stands directly behind Berg, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. At this moment, the Islamic State does not exist as a caliphate or a government. It is a concept built on a digital file. Zarqawi understands that the act of killing is secondary to the act of filming. He transforms a backroom execution into a high-stakes media product. This is not chaotic violence. It is cold, calculated social engineering. The recording continues. Zarqawi steps forward to ensure his presence is documented. He personally drew the blade and decapitated Nick Berg. The mechanism tested on Nick Berg scaled rapidly. By the summer of 2004, the focus shifted from symbolic targets to systematic social purging. American engineer Eugene Armstrong became the next face of the digital scaffold. Zarqawi personally filmed the decapitation. He ensured the lens captured every detail. The strategy moved inward. Terror was no longer just an export for Western screens. It became a local regulatory tool. Zarqawi expanded the definition of the enemy to include anyone outside his narrow dogma. Sunnis, Shiites, and aid workers fell into the same category of infidel. The methodology was precise. Medieval punishments met modern distribution. Public spaces transformed. He ordered crucifixions in the streets. The smell of charred remains and acrid smoke began to cling to the city dust after public burnings. This wasn't chaotic violence. It was social engineering through extreme trauma. Locals gave him a title that stripped away any religious pretension. They called him the Sheikh of the Slaughterers. The system outlived its architect. Zarqawi normalized the televised execution as a standard of modern conflict. He utilized stonings and beheadings to paralyze entire communities into submission. The infrastructure of fear remained operational even after the leadership was targeted. On June 7, 2006, a U.S. airstrike eliminated Zarqawi in a safe house near Bakuba. The elimination of Zarqawi did not stop the machine, it accelerated. By 2006, the media-driven executions shifted from hidden safe houses to the center of public life. Ancient ruins once hosted tourists and scholars. Now they hosted executioners. Why were historical monuments and busy squares targeted? These sites were the lungs of the city. To control them was to control the collective memory of the population. ISIS transformed marketplaces into disciplinary zones. They turned prisons into factories for human processing. The contrast was absolute. In Palmyra, the Roman theater stood for 2,000 years as a symbol of culture. In 2015, it became a stage for mass child-led executions. The stone remained, the purpose vanished. This was not random chaos, it was architectural engineering. Every street corner became a potential broadcast point for the caliphate's brand of justice. Social spaces were scrubbed of life. They were rebuilt as an infrastructure of submission. The survivors still walk these streets in silence. This architecture of fear demanded administrative borders. By mid-2014, the group swallowed a third of Iraq and Syria, an area comparable in size to Great Britain. The chaos of the Syrian civil war in 2013 provided the vacuum. In the middle of 2014, the black flags moved, town by town, city by city. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi stepped into the light and declared himself caliph. Territory meant resources. Resources meant a transition from hit-and-run tactics to a bureaucratic machine of death. How did they maintain control over millions of lives? They turned the streets into a gallery of horrors. In July 2014, Mosul fell. Iraq's second-largest city became a testing ground for institutionalized slaughter. Executioners worked with industrial precision. In the heat of July, the air carried a heavy, sweet metallic scent. It was the smell of mass graves ripening under the sun. Along the main public routes, metal spikes lined the pavement. ISIS fighters mounted severed heads on the tips. Drivers passed them on their way to work. Children saw them on their way to find food. The violence was no longer a protest, it was the law. After the fall of the city, they executed more than 4,000 prisoners in a single month. Systemic extermination replaced individual executions. 10 years after a single American died on camera in 2004, the machine evolved. It reached its industrial peak in Sinjar. Thousands of Yazidi men lined the edges of freshly dug trenches. Gunshots followed. Bodies tumbled into the dirt. Those who remained faced a different fate. How did the caliphate handle thousands of kidnapped women? Their bodies became a state-regulated commodity. This was not the chaotic violence of soldiers. The Department of Fatwas issued official pamphlets with purple stamps. They codified the sale of human beings. Women and girls became biological and economic resources. This was the institutional norm of the shadow economy. In the province of Diyala, the scenery changed. Men unrolled heavy fabric banners across the main streets. They hammered signs into the sun-bleached walls. The warnings used the dry administrative language of a tax office. Disobedience equaled immediate liquidation. Resistance was not an option. Years later, investigators entered the cleared zones. Shovels hit the earth with a dry, hollow crunch against bone. They uncovered mass graves filled with skulls. Some pits held only severed heads. In 2016, the United Nations officially classified these systematic actions as genocide. In August 2014, social media feeds collapsed under the weight of a single video. It was the execution of James Foley. This visual standard had been in development for years. Its goal was simple: turn a civilian into a global psychological weapon. Why transform a murder into a high-budget production? To convert local violence into a total media blockade. The world stopped. Foley was an American journalist. He was kidnapped in Syria in 2012 while documenting the war. For 2 years, he was a ghost. Then, on August 19, 2014, he reappeared on every screen on Earth. The framing was surgical. Foley kneels in the dirt. He wears a loose orange tunic. Beside him stands a militant in black, face-masked, knife in hand. The desert sand is a dull, dead brown. The orange fabric of the jumpsuit screams against the landscape. It is chemically bright. This was not a random choice of clothing. The orange robes were a direct visual replica of the uniforms worn by detainees at the American prison in Guantanamo Bay. It was a symbolic reversal. The prisoner had become the executioner. Foley spoke to the lens. The pressure was visible in his eyes. Seconds later, the blade moved. The camera cut away. He was the first American citizen officially executed by the group. The industry of death did not pause. 2 weeks later, on September 2, 2014, a second file appeared. The victim was Foley and Sotloff, another journalist, another orange robe, another kneeling figure in the dust. Sotloff was executed using the exact same choreography, same camera angle, same desert backdrop, same black-clad figure with a blade. This was serial production. The group officially declared the killings a direct retaliation for United States airstrikes in Iraq. After the deaths of James Foley and Foley and Sotloff, the kidnapping machine shifted focus. In September 2014, the production line moved from journalists to those who arrived to save lives. The status of a volunteer no longer offered protection. It became a high-value target for propaganda. British taxi driver Alan Henning traveled to Syria to deliver food and water. He was a civilian with a conscience. He faced a calculated military execution machine. Contrast defines the era. A man who drove a cab in Salford stood in the sand against a global terror franchise. The industry of death followed a strict schedule. Each new execution appeared with a fixed interval of 2 to 3 weeks. This was not a sequence of crimes, it was a broadcast grid. The world did not just watch a murder, it waited for the next episode of a high-budget snuff series. In mid-September 2014, the group released The Killing of David Haines. On October 3rd, they published the execution of Alan Henning. Before the screen went black, they showed the next victim. American aid worker Peter Kassig appeared briefly in the final frames of Henning's video. His death followed soon after. The strategy worked. The videos bypassed borders and hit every smartphone on the planet. Visibility translated into numbers. After watching the high-definition broadcasts, thousands of radicalized recruits traveled to the caliphate to join the ranks. Western nations were beginning to adapt to the initial shock. But on January 31, 2015, the media center's lens shifted toward Japanese reporter Kenji Goto. Goto entered Syria on a rescue mission. He wanted to save a friend. He found a cage instead. The group filmed his end and broadcast it to the world. In Tokyo, the television screens never went dark. A low, rhythmic murmur of news reports filled Japanese living rooms for days. The same grainy footage, the same orange jumpsuit. The nation entered a state of collective trauma. How did a localized conflict paralyze a country thousands of miles away? By turning a single death into a psychological siege. The group had learned to take more than just individuals hostage. They held the mental state of entire nations captive. The terror expanded beyond foreign journalists. Throughout 2015, the blade reached Egyptians, Nigerians, and Syrians. No one was safe. Executioners stopped looking for crimes. They started creating labels. They branded locals as spies or apostates to justify the assembly line of death. The killings required no evidence. They required no trial. Victims disappeared into the soil without a word. 3 days after Kenji Goto's death, the media center shifted its lens. On February 3, 2015, the group's directors fundamentally escalated the script. The target was Muath al-Qasasbi, a pilot of the Royal Jordanian Air Force. Why abandon the knife for a steel cage and fire? To pierce the audience's rising threshold of sensory shock. Standard death had become a background noise. The engineers of the caliphate required a spectacle of industrial agony. In January, al-Qasasbi's F-16 crashed near Raqqa during a coalition mission. He became a high-value asset. While Japan scrambled for negotiations, the video was already in the archive. They filmed the execution weeks before the release, holding the footage as a political blade during the diplomatic talks. The production value reached a new peak. High-definition cameras captured the architecture of the kill. A heavy metal door slammed shut. The sound of the latch echoed. Al-Qasasbi stood inside a black steel cage. A trail of fuel stretched toward the bars. The torch hit the liquid. Fire raced across the sand. Jordan was a vital link in the international coalition. This execution was designed to paralyze the Allied air forces through pure televised trauma. The pilot died in a cage of white-hot steel. Amman responded within hours. The Jordanian government executed Sajida al-Rishawi, the failed suicide bomber, by hanging. The burning of Muath al-Qasasbi was not the ceiling. It was a prototype. By June 2015, the industrial production of snuff media reached its peak. How do you force millions to watch a murder? You merge the aesthetics of high-end cinema with the raw physiology of extinction. The process became a technical challenge for the executioners. ISIS directors deployed multiple HD cameras and drones to capture the mechanics of death from every angle. In one sequence, 5 men accused of spying were locked in a steel cage. A crane lowered the structure into a filthy swimming pool. Underwater cameras recorded the exact moment the lungs failed and the struggle stopped. The variety of the content expanded to maintain engagement. Other victims had detonating cord wrapped around their necks. High-speed cameras captured the instant the explosives turned human bodies into red mist. In another scene, prisoners were locked inside a car before a soldier fired a rocket-propelled grenade into the fuel tank. This was not a chaotic recording of a war crime. It was a calculated media product. They used professional editing software to sync the screams with rhythmic chants. Every drop of blood was color-graded for maximum contrast. To the group, the killing was the raw material. The video was the weapon. The digital metrics confirmed the success of the strategy. A single short clip of an execution could rack up 10 million views in less than 24 hours. 10 million views. Tens of thousands of civilians murdered. Thousands more abducted. For millions under the caliphate, death was not a threat. It was the only functioning infrastructure. The UN later classified this system as institutionalized demographic control. It was not chaotic wartime violence. It was a cold, administrative restructuring of society through the elimination of the non-compliant. Resistance led to a single outcome. A shopkeeper forgets a tax. A farmer hides a radio. A teacher refuses a new curriculum. Each act ends on the pavement of a public square. ISIS turned ordinary streets into permanent scaffolds. How did they ensure the next generation would not rebel? They integrated the slaughter into the school day. Children stood in the front rows of execution circles. They watched the blade and the bullet from 3 feet away. Then, the roles reversed. A child soldier receives a direct order. He steps forwards. He raises a black handgun. He shoots a kneeling prisoner in the back of the head without blinking. The world initially dismissed the reports as rumors. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi had spent years engineering this specific brand of psychological rot. By June 2015, the rumors became high-definition files. Propaganda units staged every killing with the precision of a film set. They ensured the terror was witnessed, recorded, and archived. This was the realization of the process started by Zarqawi. The propaganda of individual executions eventually lost its impact. To maintain control, the group's methodology mutated into mass punitive actions against any civilian population suspected of disloyalty. Terror became a bureaucratic process. The mechanism was simple. The group published digital hit lists online. Who appeared on these lists? Usually ordinary farmers and low-level municipal clerks. These individuals formed the backbone of the local economy. Once a name appeared on the screen, the hunt began. Militants tracked them to their homes or fields. Execution followed immediately. The strategy aimed at social decapitation. In the region of Hawija, this systematic purging reached its peak. The lists didn't just target individuals, they erased entire professional classes. When Iraqi forces entered the area in 2017, they found the results in the earth. 260 dismembered bodies of police troops lay in a single trench. This was not a chaotic byproduct of war. It was a calculated liquidation. The mass grave in Hawija appeared exactly as the local agricultural sector collapsed. The farmers who fed the province had been prioritized in the online lists and eliminated. The violence expanded geographically. In Libya, 21 Egyptian cops were marched onto a beach in orange jumpsuits. They were migrant laborers, not soldiers. The cameras recorded them praying in Arabic before the knives reached their throats. By 2017, the administrative centers of this system began to crumble. The group lost its grip on the streets of Mosul and Raqqa. The bodies of 260 policemen in Hawija were only the tip of the iceberg. As they retreated, the militants turned entire regions into hidden graveyards. In Mosul, the scale of the void became measurable. Investigators moved into the ruins of the 2017 collapse. They cleared slabs of shattered concrete and twisted rebar. In one trench alone, they found 500 bodies. Most were Iraqi civilians and former soldiers. All had been shot at close range. Further north, the ground in Raqqa held a different category of horror. Search teams focused on the city's deep wells. How did they vanish without a trace? The group forced victims into these shafts and buried them alive to erase the evidence of their existence. The air at these sites carried the heavy, cloying scent of decomposition and damp earth. Every excavated meter revealed more layers of the systematic purge. By 2018, the territory from Baghouz to the borders of Mosul had become the largest forensic crime scene in the Middle East. International teams of pathologists began the cataloging. They found the infrastructure of the killing machine abandoned in the dirt. Suitcases sat in the rubble, packed with unused suicide vests. Near them lay metal cages once used for filmed drownings. Investigators photographed the rust and the watermarks on the bars. The violence was not a series of random outbursts. It was a managed industrial process. In March of 2019, the final stronghold in Baghouz fell. Journalists found the last traces of the collapse: fresh graves and bodies with hands still bound by plastic zip ties. The caliphate ended in 2019. Mass graves in Raqqa and Mosul were not just an aftermath. They were the conclusion of a system that began on municipal stadiums before thousands of witnesses. Sports arenas no longer hosted competitions. They hosted theatrical slaughter. By late 2015, the caliphate had re-engineered these public spaces into administrative hubs of terror. The procedure followed a strict protocol. A prisoner is led onto the grass. His eyes are covered with a thick blindfold. He is forced to his knees in the center of the pitch. Behind him stands a judge in a black turban. The judge reaches back to adjust the detonator on his suicide belt. For whom were these choreographed executions intended? For local paralysis of will and global blackmail of governments. The stadium's PA system crackled. The judge's voice echoed against the empty concrete stands of the open bowl. He spoke in flawless, unaccented English. This was not a message for the locals in the bleachers. This was a digital broadcast for the West. The production quality was professional. High-definition cameras captured every detail. Men in orange jumpsuits kneeling in the dust, the glint of a knife, the finality of the act. These videos transformed individual hostages like James Foley and Foley and Sotloff into tools of geopolitical leverage. The strategy backfired. Instead of retreating, the international community synchronized. The horror of the stadium broadcasts forced a shift in Western military policy. In late 2015, the United States and its allies intensified a massive aerial bombing campaign specifically to dismantle the infrastructure that produced these images. When Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi detonated his suicide vest in October 2019, the caliphate's physical borders vanished. Survivors returned to what was left. They found no homes. Only concrete skeletons and the smell of old fires. Why did the violence continue until the very last hour? Survivors tell of a system built on ritualized cruelty. In Nineveh and Raqqa, fighters beheaded civilians in public squares for the sole purpose of maintaining a climate of total paralysis. Prisoners recall the sound of children screaming in nearby cells. There was no tactical goal, only the enforcement of terror. In 2020, the theater of war moved to European courtrooms. The gavel struck the wood with a dull, heavy thud. Members of the execution cell, nicknamed the Beatles, stood before judges in robes, not masks. They faced charges for the murders of James Foley and Foley and Sotloff. The high-definition gore of 2014 was replaced by thousands of pages of legal transcripts. Families received small wooden boxes. Inside were fragments of bone instead of bodies. Identification required months of DNA sequencing and forensic mapping. In late 2020 and throughout 2021, the legal machinery expanded. Trials began for the massacre of 21 Coptic Christians on the Libyan coast. The church declared the victims saints, but for the investigators, they remained evidence in an unfinished file. Thousands of names remain missing from the death registries. Many graves were never found. Bone fragments and survivor testimonies against the Beatles cell triggered the massive gears of international justice. Evidence shifted from the battlefield to the courtroom. What was the primary result of the caliphate's propaganda? The creation of the world's most detailed video archive of its own war crimes for future tribunals. UN investigators now treat high-definition execution films as digital crime scenes. Propaganda intended to recruit instead serves as a forensic map. Every frame identifies a face, a location, or a weapon. In the city centers, the transition is physical. Granite slabs replace the black flags. The names of the executed are carved into stone memorials. Thousands of ordinary citizens, once reduced to orange jumpsuits, are now listed by their full legal identities. International law has transformed the caliphate's media output into a catalog for military prosecutors. Law enforcement agencies in Europe and the Middle East cross-reference these videos with refugee databases to locate hidden militants. Today, military lawyers and UN soldiers study the footage in sterile briefing rooms.